For now, let's start from dialect on page 210, and then we'll go back to the theories and studies of social variation, right?
Okay, yeah.
Right now on page 210. So we've done
Okay.
accents, right? Now, accent was specific to how words are pronounced, right? How they're pronounced by a person. So accent is very definite just to the pronunciation of the words. In comparison, dialect is basically the form of language which is related, which is found amongst people belonging to the similar region, right? So it's something that is completely based on the geographical location of the people. So that is what
Yeah.
dialect comes in, right? Now, it's really important to remember the difference between accent and dialect, since a lot of people get confused between that. So just keep in mind that accent is about the pronunciation of the word, and dialect is something that is dependent on the geographical location, and it is more about the kind of language you use. Maybe the words. Sometimes, for example, uh, the word mate, right? So whenever you think of the
Yeah.
word mate, the first thing that probably comes into your mind is an Australian person, because that's something that we associate that word with those people, right? They use the word mate
Right.
a lot. Or how
Mhm.
there's that how Karachi people use a lot of the word abbe a lot, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
But my point is that this dialect is more about than just the pronunciation of different words. It's about different words that are being used, the kind of language that is being used amongst people, right? Then we
Yeah.
have, so dialect is broader term, right? It's about the geographical location. Now, within that, there are different social groups, the different social groups amongst people. Now, the language being used within different social groups is what we'll call sociolect, right? So
Yeah.
that's something that is specific to different class groups, social groups. That is something that is specific to a group of people, right? Now, within that, then we have idiolect. Now, idiolect is our own language, our own personal forms of communication. Now, every person, we have our own, there are certain ways of speaking, certain way of, and certain words that we might use that are specific just to us, right? We always remember, I'm sure that we all of us have friends who might associate a single word or phrase with them, that, oh, this one of my friends says this word a lot, or maybe there's a certain letter they can't pronounce right, and that's in your mind, that's how you identify them with. So
Yeah.
just like that, every person has their own language. There might be some words or phrases that I might use more than other people do. There might be some words that I might not pronounce correctly. Maybe it's the way my tongue rolls or whatnot. Maybe they're just words that I can't pronounce right. So that might be something that is specific just to my own language style, right? So
Yeah.
these are the three dialects, sociolects, and idialects. Other than that, I don't think there's a lot in this uh, chapter. You can just go through that by yourself once, just read through that. And then if there's anything, you can discuss with me on class, right? During class.
Oh,
Then we have, okay, now let's start from page 203. Now, theories and studies of social variation in language. We've already discussed the idea of how language can be used to for certain stereotypes, how it can be used as a power key, how it can be used as something uh, that is more than just a way to communicate, right? Now,
yeah.
the hypothesis that has been mentioned here is about how language kind of determines the way we think, right? The way we think about a person is reflected within our language. The way the kind of language we use for that person speaks a lot about what kind of thoughts we have about them, right? Now, there
Yeah.
are two opposite theories about in this hypothesis. Basically, there's linguistic determinism and there's linguistic relativism. Linguistic determinism is when we believe that the words we use to directly frame our thoughts, and linguistic relativism is basically that um, if we have, um, for example, if the language that we use is not, okay, let's use an example here, right? So, for For example, if I say that let's not use this one word to describe this person, are you able to find other? Now, if that person really is important to you, if that person you really do care about them, just because I restricted you, just because I said, oh, hey, don't use this one word to describe them, you will still be able to find other words to refer to them, right? You won't just give up like, oh, okay, now I can't even talk to them anymore because I don't know how I should refer to them or how to talk to them. Because they are important to you, because you view them in a good, positive social lighting, you will find other ways to refer to them, to talk about them. So, so even if if the connection between the language and your thought is weak, you will still find other words to think about it. Think about that person. You will not be directly linked. A very common example for this is, for example, let's take the N word, for example, right? So the N word is racially incorrect. You're not supposed to say that if you're not a black person. However, a lot of people, the second you tell them, oh, hey, you can't use the N word to refer to this person, or you can't use it because of your ethnicity, what is the first reaction that a lot of people face? It's usually, oh, what do you mean? How else am I supposed to refer to them? Oh, it's just a part of my vocabulary now. So that small thing, even though it seems something so small, that says a lot about their thoughts on that specific people, on that specific social group, or that specific ethnicity, right? It says a lot about how they perceive them, and how if that group of people really was as important to them as they say they are, they would not have to have we they would not have had to be reliant on a singular word just to describe them. Their vocabulary should not have suddenly felt so restricted just because somebody told them that, oh, hey, maybe you shouldn't be using this word, right? So this is a very I think obvious example on how this theory applies, how this hypothesis can be applied. Now, a few other examples is that some language changes which have reinforced greater social equality for various groups. So basically, let's say gender. So now a lot of traditional words for employment that we have usually consist of the word man, right? We have fireman, policeman, whatnot. So a lot of these words have been changed with time, with the passage of time. They have been utilized to make them applicable to every person. For example, police officer, firefighter. Now, same thing with comedy. Over the passage of time, a lot of time, most of the uh, so-called comedy, so-called jokes were usually based on people's physical appearance, right? On people's physical appearance, their sexual orientation. So most of the jokes were in regards to this. But now with the passage of time, some of them, people have started to accept the fact that most of them are not appropriate, they should not be used. And in some countries, when it comes to ethnicity, racist language, and it's even illegal, right? So now these are just different ways how just changing the language, just changing the word itself, uh, makes the difference of making different social groups feel more included, right? So the whole purpose, for example, in the gender-wise in the career, when we change the word from policeman to police officer, no such change happened in career, right? But all it did is just include. It made the language, it made the career itself more inclusive to all genders, right? And the same thing with racist slurs and whatnot. When you make it illegal, when you say that, oh, this is not appropriate anymore, so you're making it inclusive to all ethnicities, right? You're making it inclusive to all kinds of people. So this is different amongst different peoples. Now, for example, disability, a lot of people don't prefer the term even disabled anymore. They prefer that a person with a disability, or and the word handicapped is not preferred either, right? So this is also just another way to feel more inclusive of all kinds of people. So we have this now when we come to language and gender. Now, we've we've already done how accents have the power in how they can affect stereotypes, how they can affect the way we perceive other people, the way we think. Now, another thing that we now we'll be studying in language and gender is that not it is not only accents that can do that, it's also the way we speak, the phrases that we use, right? For example, if I use the word, for example, when I'm talking, if we're having a debate or if I'm giving a speech, if I start using the voice pauses a lot, I'm not sure during a debate, that will automatically leave an impression amongst people, and not in a good sense, right? It will make me seem more uncertain about what I'm saying, as if I'm hesitating a lot, I'm not sure about what I'm saying, and that in the social setting of a debate or a speech will not leave a very positive impact. So even the phrases or the words we use, even that, the way our way of communication, our style of communication can also affect stereotypes. It can either build up stereotypes amongst genders, amongst races, or it can also destroy them, right? So when it comes to
Yeah.
language and gender, there have been since basically forever, there's always been a different pattern of communication, a different pattern of language amongst men and women, right? So the way
Yeah.
men talk have always been distinctively very different from the way women talk. So to discuss this more in detail, we have okay, so basically what kind of differences that we have here, right? Now, with women, a stereotype that has always been associated with them is that all of their discourse, all of their communication is usually referred to as gossip, right? It is something that is
Yeah.
associated with women. It's something that is said that, oh, women are known as discussing more light subjects. Meanwhile, men often discuss more heavy subjects. They discuss more serious matters. They have debates. They have discussions. Now, this is something. These are just stereotypes, right? This is
Yeah.
not facts. This is just stereotypes that have been carried on through centuries, through different periods of time. Even though now interestingly, a lot of research shows that a lot of research that was conducted amongst men and different conversation between men and women, right? And that
Yeah.
research kind of proved that um, there was no visible amount of difference in which group gossiped more. Men seemed to be gossiping as much as women did, and if anything, research showed that men actually enjoyed talking about themselves and their achievements even more than women. So when this research was first held, and this research, more details about this research is, I think, on the end of page 206, right? So when this research was first held, a lot of people were really surprised and they were really shocked, right? So because how is it that this stereotype that had been attached to the image of women and men that have been carried on through centuries, and now when we actually hold a research about it, it turned out to be completely false, right? So this
Yeah.
is something. Now these stereotypes also impact the way we talk in everyday life, right? So now, for example, for example, if you have a young girl and you have a young boy, right? So if from a very young age we have fed the stereotypes in their minds that, oh hey, guys talk about more serious stuff, they talk about have debates and whatnot, and girls usually talk about like great discussions, they're more gossips, they gossip more. So even if they were not going to grow up like that, since they have been fed that idea from a very young age, they've been fed that stereotype from a very young age, they will subconsciously start doing that, right? Even if the girl was not going to gossip, just because she has been told that, oh, as a woman, that's something that is natural for you to do, that is something that you commonly will do more than men, she will automatically say that, oh, maybe this is how I'm supposed to be. And so she will
Yeah.
start doing it more, right? So this is the kind of weightage power that stereotypes can hold, and they can also impact the way we communicate them too, right? So if men are considered more dominating and women are not, if a woman is raised saying that, oh, men are more dominating, women are not as equal or whatnot, so that might even impact the way she speaks. She might be more hesitant when she's speaking, she will be more polite when she's speaking, she will not be as sure about her words when she's speaking, right? So now, for example, I have noticed this pattern amongst a lot of my female friends, how even though if they make a very good point, if they make a very good, well-educated political point, at the end of the sentence, they will always add it with, you know what I mean? I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but you get what I'm trying to say? Because it's kind
Yeah.
of been fed in their mind. You don't see guys doing that. You won't notice a lot of guys in everyday lives saying at the end of every sentence that, oh, hey, man, you know what I'm trying to say? But it's really prevalent amongst women, right? So
Oh my God,
these
that's
small,
so true.
so these small patterns of language, they can basically hint at stereotypical gender roles that have been existed in our society for a very long time. Now, so one theory is basically that women are more socially. Now we'll be studying how different linguists have did different studies on basically different language patterns between women and men and what their theories were, right? So one of
Yeah.
the theories was that women are more socially insecure, and that's why they use more standard English than men. The way they speak will always be more formal. It's more they use more standard English. They won't use as much colloquial terms as men might do in a setting. And the reason why
Mm.
is that they are more socially insecure. They feel like they need to use more standard English, more formal language to kind of leave a more strong impression on people, right? So if there's, for example, if there's an office setting, men might still be seen using colloquial language. They might still be seen being frank, but women will not, right? Women will be going out of their way to seem more formal, to be using more standard English, just because they're socially insecure about their place in that office setting, in their
Yeah.
place, that office social group. And so they will be using that language just to leave an image in their mind that, oh, I'm just as an important part of this conversation as everybody else is. So now
Yeah.
that is one of the theories on why they're using standard English more than men. Another is that men lean towards dialects because they are usually considered more tough, right? They're considered more tough, really macho. So they usually lean more towards dialects, while women, in their case, you will find accent neutralization more amongst women, where they go out of their way to not seem as much different, right? So even if they do have a really pronounced accent, the second their social setting has changed, they will try to adjust it more accordingly to the people around them. While this is not as prevalent as men, not to say that it does not exist, of course it does, but we're just saying that just on the basis of gender, right? So we're not talking
Yeah.
about their way with their race or ethnicity here, because obviously if there's one man belonging to a different race and the five other men are belonging to something else, that man will also try to change his accent or not or try his best not to make his dialect very obvious amongst them, right? But over here, we're only talking on the basis of gender. So in that case, usually women are found more trying to avoid their very specific dialect.
Yeah.
Another gender differences are basically visible in a wide variety of activities, in conversations, even the way we appear to other people, in our manners, in our body language. Now, one of the linguists that we studied before, to Peter Drudger, he found that women of each class use more prestige variants more than men of the same class, right? So even though if there's a man and a woman both belonging to first class, right, to high class
Yeah.
society, amongst that men and women, the woman will be seen using more prestige variants, right, of the English language. So he
Yeah.
concluded that using non-standard variables is not just a working class thing, but it is also a man thing, right? So it wasn't something that is just associated with working class, that you have a very colloquial way of speaking or very using very slang terms a lot. Even, for example, even now, slang terms, swear words, if you think about them, stereotypically speaking, the first image that will come into your mind is probably a man, right? That, oh, men swear a lot, they use a lot of slang words, they have a very colloquial way of speaking. You will not think of women. Even though specifically there's no reason why women would not be swearing just as much or not, but just in the stereotypical way, if you think about that, the first image that will come to your mind is usually men. So men are usually seen as using swear words more, using colloquial forms of speech more. Now, do keep this. I'm not sure if this is mentioned in the book, but do write this point down that Peter Trudgill considered women using more prestige variants than men. So basically, when we're doing these points with us in the commentary in your paper, if the text given is between a man and a woman, you will automatically be able to use each one of these studies in that, right? Even if the text itself is not stereotypical, let's say in the text, it's actually a contrast. The woman might be using more colloquial terms. The woman might be holding the floor more in the conversation. Even then, you can still use these studies because the way you will be using these studies in your commentary is basically that let's say that in a text given, the woman is using more colloquial terms, and the man is not, right? So then what you'll say is that you'll state Peter Trudger's research. You'll discuss how Peter Trudger believes that he found through research that women of each class use prestige rates more than men. And then you will discuss how, despite the fact that this is the research that Peter Trudger found, despite that, in this passage, it seems as the opposite is true, right? It seems as if they are not conforming to the stereotypical norms. And then you can also try to find the reason why. Why is it that this is not happening? Maybe in the question itself, they've given you a hint. Maybe they both belong to the same age group. So maybe they're already close enough. Since they belong to the same age group, they feel a sense of informality amongst them, right? So maybe that's why they're not conforming uh, to the typical gender stereotypical norms that they might have been if there was a bigger age difference. Or maybe in the text, maybe in the question, it has already been mentioned that the conversation between college friends. So then you can discuss how the fact that they are friends might be the reason why the speech pattern is colloquial, even though she's a woman, right? So so this is basically just to give an idea on how these different studies will be used here in commentaries. Okay, I'm just gonna go get water and then we'll continue. Okay, just give me 5 seconds. Okay, so moving forward, we also have the stereotype that, not actually stereotype, this is something that is observed in conversation, that men are seen to interrupt conversations more and they seem to hold the conversational floor more than usually women do, right? So in any conversation, if there's a text given to you, you can go out of your way to observe whether the man is the one holding the floor in that conversation, the passage that has been given to you. Now, this idea that men interrupt more, they hold the conversation floor, was something that was proved by a study that was done by Don Zimmerman and Candace West, right? Now, they did a study, they basically held research, they research, their subject was, all of the subjects were white, middle class, they were white, they were middle class, and they were under the age of 35, right? So most of them fell among the same age group. They also did not have the specific race or ethnicity issues because they all were white and they all also belonged to the same. She made sure that all of them belonged to the same class too, so that the class factor could also not have an impact on the conversation, right? So the whole point of that was to see whether just on the basis of the gender alone, how does that affect their conversation patterns. So they did a report on a total of 11 conversations between men and women, in which men were seen to use 46 interruptions, but women were only seen to use 2 interruptions, right? So this study was done by Candace West, Don Zimmerman, and this is what proves the fact that men usually interrupt conversations more or they hold the conversation floor more, right? I hope you're making bullet points, Satsa, of all of these different linguists and the studies that they have done and what point do they prove, right? So you know in your mind that in your commentary what things you need to look out for and what studies you can connect it to. Because I think out of all in this chapter, the one prevalent topic that has a lot of these studies, a lot of case studies, a lot of names that you need to memorize that will be used in commentaries a lot is basically this language and gender. And it's actually preferable if you end up getting a text between a man and a woman, because there are so many ways you can connect it to so many different studies that you usually don't have to worry about whether you'll be able to write enough on it, right? It's usually way too much to write on it. So yeah, we'll be doing practice of this. There's a text given about this on page 209. I'll be assigning you this over the probably the weekend, and then you can do it using all of these studies just to get an idea. Okay, so moving on, we have so okay, so this perceived dominance of males, the fact that they interrupt a lot, they have the habit of holding the conversation for us, have been something that has been a huge concern in a lot of education institutions, right? There was a lot of concern, especially amongst co-ed schools, co-ed education institutions, whether that might be affecting the learning capacity of the women that are studying alongside men, because of course if they're being interrupted a lot, if the men are going out of the way to hold the conversation floors, if they're not giving as much opportunities to women, is that interrupting their studies, their education pattern, right? Now a study actually showed that now I'm not exactly sure about, I am sure about the study, I just can't remember the name, so you probably can't use this as a case study. If I do end up finding the details of the research in the study, I'll send it to you. But there was a study done in different classrooms to see how different students are learning, how they're interacting with the teacher. And among the study, it was actually found that, and basically the purpose of the study was whether same-sex schools are better than co-ed schools, or whether co-ed is better than same-sex schools. And it was actually proved that for men, in the case of men, same-sex schools were a disadvantage to them because they did not have as much competition in that just among themselves, right? And they actually benefited more in co-ed schools. They benefited more when they had to interact with women, when they had to educate, when they had to learn with women, right? Not only did that improve their social skills and how basically to respect other people's opinions and whatnot, it also had a really huge impact on just their studies alone. It somehow managed to create more competition amongst them. But when it came to women seemed to be benefiting more from the same sex school than the co-ed schools. They seemed more confident. They seemed more involved when the amongst the same sex classroom in comparison to the co-ed one, right? They were more bolder, they seemed to be voicing their opinions more. And not only that, but they did not seem to be struggling socially as much. As in, even when they were placed in suddenly they were placed in a co-ed situation, they were struggling, obviously, if they've been raised as a kid in a same-sex school and then they suddenly placed them in front of boys, they were struggling. But in comparison to the boys, they were struggling less, right? So this was actually a study done and it proved that women seem to be benefiting more from same-sex education in comparison to boys. Boys seem to be benefiting more from co-ed education, right? So this study kind of also adds to the fact in this the concern that we discussed in this paragraph, the concern that was amongst many education institutions, whether the conversational patterns of men seem to be might be causing a hindrance to women or not. Now, there's also a specific difference in the way this in the language and the communication skills when it comes to computer mediated communication, right? As in like online communication. Now, if we talk about the stereotypes that comes with this, now stereotypically it is believed that online, obviously, men would be swearing a lot, men would be swearing more, they would be using more slang terms, they would be using more colloquial terms. But an actual study that was done, a lot of studies that were done, they claim that women are seen using more hostile language online than they are in real life. So women are seen using more swear words, more slang words, more colloquial terms, and just more aggressive, hostile language in general online in comparison to men, right?
Yeah.
We then have we have Robin Lakoff, which was a professor of linguists. She was a professor of linguistics in 1975. And she also wrote a book called Language in Women's Place, right, where she discussed in details on how basically language affects the conversational patterns of women. Now, according to her, she believed that a separate woman's speech exists, right? There's a separate conversational style, a separate woman speak that is specific just to them. And this human speech exists with a lot of, they have created tag questions, right? They have created tag questions, they have created
Yeah.
requests, more questioning annotations, and more declarative answers, right? So
Okay.
overall, if you see, considering how she believes that they had more questioning annotations or more declarative answers, you can see that they used a lot of, she seems to believe that women are more reliant on phonetics, right? They're more reliant on phonetics or different pronunciations, or basically the language, not the language, the volume with which they are speaking. As in, they are more emotional when they're speaking. For example, if I'm asking a
Yeah.
question, my voice might rise more than what a man might, right?
Yeah.
So in the field of social linguistics overall, Robin believes that she proposed that women's speeches can be distinguished by men's by the use of hedges. Hedges is basically in language when you're using, I think you've already done that, when the voice fillers, hedges, when you started your sentences saying phrases like sort of, like, so phrases like these are called hedges, and they are more prominent in women's speech. A lot of
Right.
very strong adjectives are used, for example, divine, gorgeous, spectacular. Just overall in the conversation, women will be seen using more adjectives than men. Women
Yeah.
are also considered as more polite. They are seen using more super polite form. They would include questions like, "Oh, would you mind if it's not too much to ask? I hope I'm not bothering you." So these kind of questions are more prevalent in amongst women than they are in men, right? They also apologize more most of the time, even if there isn't really any need to. They just have their the way they speak, they're just more apologetic, right? So most of the
Yeah.
time, if they're asking for a favor, for example, the first thing they'll start off with is, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I hope it's not too much to ask for you." Or if uh, even if they're presenting a contrasting point of view or contrasting opinion, they'll start with, "Oh, I'm sorry, but it's just that I personally believe or I personally think," right? So everything from the
Yeah.
way I'm speaking right now, first of all, I'm apologizing vocally too. I'm saying I'm sorry, but then even my tone is apologetic, right? And I'm also making excuses. "Oh, I personally think just that, so that the other person isn't offended by whatever I'm about to say, whatever opinion I'm about to say, right? So
Yeah.
these small things can be found in women's speech. They're also known as, okay. So this is an interesting study, because women are usually, they're often associated with talking a lot, right? That women talk more, and this is
Yeah.
something that is probably why the whole gossip stereotype started to. But in reality, a lot of studies show that amongst conversations, women usually tend to speak less because they are more good listeners. So they would, most of the conversations, they usually provide less input, and they're usually better listeners, right?
Okay.
Then we have, they avoid curse language, slang language. They use a lot of tag questions. They use hypercorrect grammar, and indirect requests, and they usually use a lot of tone and annotation patterns in their speech, right? Um,
Okay.
an example of this, if you want to, you can go back and remember the speech that was held between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, their president's speech among against each other. So
Okay.
if you want, you can go back, watch that video online, and then you can try to find different patterns of speech amongst both of them that might be something that is specifically associated to the gender, that if Hillary is speaking like this, is it because she's a woman? Is it, even though she is, of course, in her speech, she will be more aggressive. You might not find as many politeness principles in her speech, since
Yeah.
it's a presidential debate speech, and of course she was in competition against him, but at the same time, you will still find different patterns of speech amongst them. Okay, they both will have different styles of communicating. They both will have different ways they are communicating, trying to communicate their point across to one another, right?
Yeah.
Then we have, okay, so male and female conversations. So they're different. Now, when it comes to conversations, there are different words or vocabulary that is associated just with the word conversation, right? You can also use the word chat instead of conversation, discuss, communicate, gossip, debate. But even these, every single word in the English language has its own connotation, right? There's some words, even though they all might have the same meaning necessarily, but they still have different connotations. One word might have a more positive connotation, one word might have a more negative connotation. Now, for example, let's consider the word chat and gossip. Now, in a way, for example, we can say that chat and gossip is kind of the same. It might have the same meaning, right? But at the same time, gossip is something that is has negative connotation. It is seen in a negative light, while chat in comparison might be seen as in comparison might be seen in a more of a positive light, right? Now,
Yeah.
one of the things that add to the stereotypes that have been fixed to men and women is basically that the words using to describe their conversations too. For example, if a group of men are talking most of the time, but you'll when you're most of the time to explain the conversation that they were having, you will automatically use words like, oh, they're having their own discussion. Oh, they're just debating over stuff all over again. So you will use words like that, right? Debate, discussion. Even if they aren't talking about necessarily very serious, heavy topics, it's just words that are associated stereotypically with conversation amongst men. But when women are talking, whether that be, and over here, we're not talking about what subject is being talked amongst them, right? It doesn't matter whether the subject is being discussed is heavy or light. Right now, we're only talking in terms of the stereotypes that are attached to the kinds of conversations they have. So when women are discussing, automatically the first thing that might come in your mind is, oh, women are gossiping or they're just chatting with one another. So these words are something that are stereotypically associated with conversations amongst women, right? We'll just
Okay.
do till here for now, and then we'll start from 207 tomorrow, right? And I think
Oh,
then we'll be done with our chapter actually. Yeah, we'll be
yeah.
done with all of this chapter. Did you go through the rest of the previous chapter, what we've done so far over the weekend?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, is there anything that you felt like you might need to discuss with me again? Any concept that you feel like you might need to go over with me?
No, there's nothing in specific.
Okay, that's good. Once we're done with this chapter and I start assigning you commentaries, before assigning you commentaries, uh, we'll go through example responses, right? Sample responses so that you have an idea on exactly how do you use all of these points in your commentaries, right? So we'll go through some of the responses, some of the sample responses, and then I'll assign you a
Okay.
commentary over the weekend, right?
All right.
Okay. So I think that's more than enough today then.
Okay. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.